In a chapel in the Cathedral of Saint Bavo in Ghent, Belgium, behind bulletproof glass, hangs a painted polyptych nearly 12 feet wide. It is, by most reckonings, the single most stolen painting in the history of Western art. It has been carried off by Napoleon's troops, sold to Berlin, smuggled into a French chateau by retreating Belgian clergy, captured by the Nazis, hidden in an Austrian salt mine, and very nearly dynamited on the personal order of an SS general. 12 of the 12 panels have been recovered. One panel, a small painted scene called The Just Judges, was stolen in 1934 and never seen again. In the place where it should hang, the museum has installed a black and white photographic copy. On the back of the original gilded frame, written in pencil, are the words, "Taken from Verirad, taken from treason." This painting was completed in 1432. It has been carried across borders 13 separate times, dismembered and reassembled multiple times, and is the subject of an unsolved 1934 art theft mystery that has produced more conspiracy theories than almost any other crime in European art history. To understand why anyone would risk so much to steal it, we have to start with what it actually is, because the Ghent altarpiece is, in addition to being the most stolen painting in history, almost certainly the most consequential single object in the development of Western oil painting. The Ghent altarpiece, or Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, to use its proper title, is a hinged polyptych. 12 painted panels divided across two sides. When the wings are closed, you see one set of images. When the wings are opened on feast days, you see another, much more elaborate set. Closed, the altarpiece shows an Annunciation, the angel Gabriel addressing the Virgin Mary across the upper panels. On the lower register, two donor figures, Jodocus Vidjad and his wife Lisbeth Borlut, kneel in prayer, flanked by life-size painted statues of John the Baptist and John the Evangelist rendered in grisaille, gray monochrome to simulate sculpture. These four lower panels are some of the most extraordinary trompe-l'oeil in Western art. Van Eyck painted the figures of the two saints so convincingly as carved stone statues that on first viewing, many visitors think they are looking at actual sculpture. When the wings are open, the visual register changes completely. The central panel is dominated by the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb. A white sacrificial lamb stands on an altar at the center of a flower-filled meadow, blood streaming from its chest into a chalice. Pilgrims, prophets, knights, hermits, virgin martyrs, and saints stream toward the Lamb from every direction. Above God the Father sits enthroned. To his left and right are the Virgin Mary, John the Baptist, two singing angel choirs, an organ-playing angel, and on the outermost panels, Adam and Eve, fully nude, painted with shockingly direct anatomical realism. The painting was commissioned by Jodocus V.G., a wealthy merchant and Ghent councilman, for the family chapel in what was then the St. John's Church, now St. Bavo's Cathedral. The painters were two brothers, Hubert van Eyck and Jan van Eyck. The inscription on the altarpiece itself, when decoded, reads roughly, "The painter Hubert van Eyck, than whom none greater was found, began the work, and Jan, his brother, second in art, finished the burdensome task at the expense of Jodocus Vidjad." By this verse on the 6th of May, he invites you to behold what is done. Hubert died in 1426, partway through the project. Jan completed it, and the altarpiece was unveiled on May 6, 1432. The 1432 date matters enormously. The Ghent altarpiece is one of the first major works in Western art painted using the new technique of oil painting, pigments dissolved in linseed oil rather than the older tempera medium of egg yolk and water. Oil paint allowed for slow drying, blending, glazing, and the buildup of translucent layers that produce light effects, a sense of inner radiance from beneath the surface that had been impossible in tempera. When Italian artists and connoisseurs traveled north and encountered Van Eyck's work in the decades following its completion, they were astonished. The Italian Renaissance painter Antonello de Messina is said to have traveled to Flanders specifically to learn the new technique, then carried it back to Italy. In a real sense, the entire technical apparatus of European oil painting, from Bellini to Titian to Rembrandt to Vermeer to Caravaggio, traces back to what the Van Eyck brothers were doing in Ghent in the 9,420 seconds. The first theft of the Ghent altarpiece happened during the Protestant iconoclasm of 1566. Calvinist mobs targeted Catholic religious imagery across the Low Countries, smashing statues and tearing down altarpieces. The Van Eyck altarpiece was almost destroyed but was hidden by Catholic loyalists in the cathedral tower at the last moment. In 1794, Napoleon's French revolutionary armies overran Belgium. Napoleon's officials, on imperial orders to assemble a new universal museum in Paris, the future Louvre, selected the Ghent altarpiece as one of the most desirable works in the conquered Netherlands. French troops carried the 4 central panels back to Paris. They hung in the Louvre for almost 20 years on public display. The cathedral in Ghent was left with only the outer wing panels and a gaping hole where the masterpiece should have been. After Napoleon's defeat in 1815, the central panels were returned to Ghent. The altarpiece was reassembled, almost intact, but almost is the operative word. In 1816, the Bishop of Ghent, nervous about future political instability and chronically short of cash, sold the 6 wing panels to a Brussels art dealer for 10,000 francs. The dealer, in turn, sold them to a Berlin collector named Edward Solly. Solly sold them to the King of Prussia. By 1821, the wing panels of the Ghent altarpiece were on display in the Royal Museum in Berlin, the future Kaiser Friedrich Museum, today the Bode Museum. The altarpiece had now been split between Ghent, the central panels, and Berlin, the wing panels, for the better part of a century. In 1894, somebody in Berlin made a decision that would set in motion decades of controversy. They removed the wing panels from their original frames and sawed them apart down the middle, so that the front side painting and the back side painting of each wing could be displayed simultaneously on opposite walls. This was the conservation crime of the 19th century. The wings, which had been hinged double-sided paintings that worked as a unit when opened and closed, were now permanently split into independent panels. They could never again function the way Van Eyck designed them. When the wings were eventually returned to Ghent, they had to be re-glued, a botched and not quite successful restoration that you can still see traces of on the panels today. After the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles included a remarkable clause. Article 247, buried in the reparations section, specifically required Germany to return to Belgium the panels of the Ghent altarpiece by the brothers Hubert and Jan van Eyck that were presently in the Kaiser Friedrich Museum at Berlin. This was, as far as I know, the only painting in the world that had its repatriation written into a peace treaty. In June 1920, the Ghent altarpiece was reassembled in its entirety for the first time since 1816. All 12 panels, front and back, were returned to Saint Bavo's Cathedral. A public ceremony marked the moment. The Bishop of Ghent welcomed the altarpiece home. The treaty had treated the painting not as art, but as territory, as something that had been wrongfully taken, and that must be restored. It was an extraordinary precedent, but the reunion was not destined to last long. On the night of the 10th of April, 1934, in the cathedral's Vijad chapel, somebody broke through a side door, walked into the chapel, and removed 2 of the painted panels. One was the lower left panel of the open altarpiece configuration. The Just Judges, painted by Hubert van Eyck, or Jan, depending on the scholar, it depicted 10 ornately dressed riders on horseback, the just judges of the world, riding toward the central adoration of the Lamb. The other panel was the reverse side, a grisaille image of John the Baptist. The thieves left a typed ransom note. They demanded 1 million Belgian francs, the equivalent of roughly $30 million in modern money, for the return of both panels. They also returned the John the Baptist grisaille a few weeks later in pieces sent in installments to the bishop. As a demonstration of good faith, the Just Judges, the principal panel they had stolen, was never returned. The Just Judges theft of 1934 has, in the 92 years since, become one of the most analyzed unsolved crimes in art history. The Belgian police investigation produced 2 principal suspects. The first suspect was a Ghent stockbroker named Arsène Godertier. In November 1934, 7 months after the theft, Godertier suffered a heart attack at a political meeting and was carried home. On his deathbed, he reportedly called his lawyer to his bedside and whispered, "I alone know where the mystic lamb is. The information is in the drawer of my desk in an envelope marked Mutualite." He died moments later. His lawyer searched the desk. He found drafts of the ransom letters. He found carbon copies of correspondence with the bishop. He found notes suggesting Godertier had been the mastermind of the theft, but he did not find an explicit location For the Just Judges panel, Godetier left several cryptic clues. He had written in one of the ransom letters that the panel was in a place where I nor anyone can take it without drawing the attention of the public. This phrase has been parsed in dozens of ways. Some have argued it points to a public building. Others have argued it points to a graveyard. Others have argued it points to the cathedral itself, that Godetier had hidden the Just Judges inside the cathedral's own walls. Belgian investigators tore through Godetier's papers and possessions. They never found the panel. A more pessimistic theory is that Godetier never actually had the panel hidden at all, that the deathbed line was an act, that the panel had already been smuggled out of Belgium and sold, and that Godetier was protecting an accomplice or simply too dazed to give a clear answer. The second suspect, named in more recent investigations, was a wealthy Belgian businessman who allegedly used the Just Judges as private collateral and ultimately concealed it in the cellar of a private estate. Several conspiracy theories have surfaced over the decades. One claim is that the panel was hidden in the cathedral itself, perhaps walled into a confessional or buried in the crypt. In 2018, Belgian investigators using ground-penetrating radar surveyed sections of the cathedral floor. They found nothing. Another claim is that the panel was hidden in a public square in Ghent and that an obscure pencil mark on a cathedral document points to its location. None of these theories has produced a panel. When the panel could not be recovered, the Belgians did the only thing they could. They commissioned a copyist, a Belgian painter named Jeff van der Weken, to paint a replica of the Just Judges from old photographs and from his memory of having seen the original. In 1945, van der Weken's replica was installed in the original Just Judges position in the altarpiece. It hangs there today. Van der Weken's replica is itself a slightly unsettling presence in the altarpiece. The other 11 panels are 15th century Van Eyck. The lower left corner is a 1945 imitation. The brushwork is slightly off, the color saturation is slightly different. The figures' faces are not quite the faces in the surviving photographs. Van der Weken was, it turns out, a known forger of medieval paintings, a fact that has fueled its own conspiracy theory that he was offered the commission so that the Belgians could quietly find the original panel later and substitute it back in without anyone noticing, but they never did because they never had it. In May 1940, Belgium was invaded by Nazi Germany. The clergy at Saint Bavo's Cathedral, anticipating the threat, had already evacuated the remaining 11 Van Eyck panels south to a chateau in Belgian government in exile had arranged temporary storage in a French museum. The plan was for the Vatican to take custody if PO fell. In 1942, Hitler personally ordered the seizure of the Ghent altarpiece. He believed the painting was rightfully German. In his ideology, an expression of greater Germanic cultural patrimony that should never have been returned to Belgium under Versailles. He also wanted it as a centerpiece of the planned Fuhrer Museum, the colossal art museum he intended to build in Linz, Austria, his hometown. German agents, with the cooperation of the Vichy French government, located the altarpiece in Piau and shipped it east. By August 1942, the 11 surviving panels were in Germany. By 1944, as Allied bombing intensified, the altarpiece, along with thousands of other looted artworks intended for the Fuhrer Museum, was relocated to the salt mine at Altassi, deep in the Austrian Alps. The stable temperature and humidity of the mine made it ideal for storage. In the final days of the war, in late April 1945, with American forces approaching the salt mine, a fanatical Nazi, August Agruber, the Gauleiter of Upper Austria, ordered the entire art repository in Altassi to be destroyed. He had ordered 8 large aerial bombs to be placed inside the mine. His order was that, when American forces arrived, the bombs would be detonated and the entire mine, with all 5,000 stored works of art, would be sealed forever in a single underground explosion. The Ghent altarpiece, hidden in a chamber deep inside the mine, would have been pulverized. The altarpiece survived because of a small group of Austrian mining engineers and miners who quietly disobeyed Agruber's orders. Realizing what was about to happen, they removed the aerial bombs from the storage chambers and replaced them with smaller controlled charges. Enough to seal the mine entrances against ground attack, but not enough to destroy the interior. When the U.S. Army's Monuments men entered Altassi in May 1945, they found the altarpiece intact, along with thousands of other masterpieces. The mine had been sealed, but not destroyed. The Ghent altarpiece had survived its 5th major recovery in 500 years. The Ghent altarpiece was returned to Saint Bavo's Cathedral in late 1945. It has been there in its full reassembled form, minus the still missing just judges ever since. In 2012, the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage in Brussels began a major multi-year conservation project on the altarpiece. The painting was disassembled panel by panel and brought to a specialized conservation studio in the Museum of Fine Arts in Ghent. Visitors could watch the conservators working through a glass wall. The conservation produced a surprise. Beneath layers of grimy, yellowed varnish and 16th century overpaint, the conservators uncovered the original Van Eyck surface. The colors were astonishingly vivid, the green meadows almost luminescent, the red robes a saturated vermilion, the angel's wings gilded with leaf in passages that had been completely obscured by centuries of dirt. But the most surprising discovery was in the face of the central lamb, beneath a 16th century overpaint, which had given the lamb a calmer, almost human-faced expression. The conservators uncovered Van Eyck's original lamb. Its face was unsettlingly hyper-realistic, with two slightly offset eyes that gave it an almost confrontational stare. The humanoid lamb became a minor internet phenomenon in 2020 when the restored panel was unveiled, but it raised, for art historians, a more serious question. If Van Eyck's intended Lamb of God looked nothing like the gentle pastoral lamb that had been visible for 400 years, what other parts of the altarpiece might have been reimagined by later restorers, copyists, and overpainters across 6 centuries? We are only now, in 2026, beginning to understand the original Ghent altarpiece, the painting Van Eyck actually made. In November 2021, a final exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts in Ghent unveiled the fully restored altarpiece. The Just Judges panel remained absent. In its place, Jeff van der Vaken's 1945 replica, the Belgian Federal Police's art theft unit, the Federal Investigative Tip Line, and a dedicated official liaison still exist to handle leads on the Just Judges. Tips come in, a few per year, none has produced the panel. In 2024, a Belgian art historian named Paul de Saint-Hubert published a book arguing that the panel is buried beneath the floor of a private estate near Dendermonde. Police have not yet excavated. Here is the thing about the Ghent altarpiece. It is a painting that has spent more of its existence being moved, hidden, fought over, stolen, sold, ransomed, and politically negotiated than it has spent quietly hanging in the cathedral for which it was made. Almost 600 years, 13 displacements, 5 reassemblies, 1 panel still missing. It keeps getting stolen because it sits at the intersection of every major conflict in European history. Religious wars, revolutionary wars, world wars, national identity disputes, repatriation disputes, criminal opportunism. The altarpiece is, in a real sense, a witness. The same panels that were painted by candlelight in a Bruges workshop in the 9,420 seconds have hung in the Louvre under Napoleon, in Kaiser-era Berlin, in a French country museum during the German invasion, in a Nazi salt mine, in the conservation lab, where their original colors were rediscovered. They have been seen by, at minimum, tens of millions of people across 6 centuries. And 1 panel of it is still missing. Maybe it is buried in a Belgian garden. Maybe it is hidden in a private collection. Maybe it was destroyed in 1934 by panicked thieves who could not move it. Maybe we will find it tomorrow. Maybe we will never find it. In the meantime, the replica hangs in its place. The cathedral chapel is open to the public. The empty space where the Just Judges should be is like the empty frames in the Gardner Museum in Boston, the most powerful exhibit in the room.